Our talk title this morning is Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda, and it fits beautifully with everything that Reverend Sandy and Wayne shared today. So thank you once again for that synchronicity, that oneness of spirit, and how it shows up without any planning, although sometimes it is wise to plan. So I am wondering what David is thinking about coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Well, I'm thinking I probably shoulda, coulda, woulda prepared a little bit more. No, I don't. What I would have said if I know. When we talk about woulda, coulda, shoulda, we're quite often talking about the past, aren't we? Regrets and things that happened in the past, and where I would be now if I didn't have done those things in the past. And I think it's important for us to remember right off the bat, memories are current thoughts based on past conditions. They're current thoughts of past conditions that we're bringing back to the current time. They're done with, they're over with, they're in the past. But for some reason we like to bring them back into the current now moment. They have no power over us other than what we attribute to them in the now moment. Memories are pesky things, aren't they? I remember my first psychology class in college, and the very first thing we talked about was nature and nurture, and how things, how do we develop psychologically. Nature refers to how genetics influence an individual personality, whereas nurture refers to how their environment, said things like relationships, experiences, and conditions, influence and impact development on a personal level. And I think in Science of Mind we spend a lot of time balancing our experiences between the two of those. And I think rather than looking at it genetically and nurturing wise, I think I would look at it in terms of balancing our natural, which is our spiritual nature, and nurturing that which is our physical nature, and balancing those two together. Knowing that our spiritual nature is what we came here with, and our nurturing is what we have received from the experiences we are here as human beings experiencing. Knowing that we are spiritual beings having a physical human experience, but we have to remember that these physical experiences transcend the physical parameters of who we are. Holding ourselves back due to time and space conditions gives more power to our physical aspects and tendencies than to our spiritual truth, the essence of who we really are.
Yes, agree. And I like how you looked back at how we quite often use the idea of coulda, shoulda, and woulda, and in our own lives. So hopefully right now, and from the moment that you heard those three words, you've already started looking at, when do I say those words and how do I use those words? Do I use them to serve my now, or do I use them to drudge up the past and pull it forward with me in a negative way? And the nature part that David talked about, that ultimately is God, God as you. And so when we talk about that, another word that we quite often use in Science of Mind is truth. We use the word truth for God, truth as principles of life. And those principles are common to all of us and for all of us. And they're relatable. And yet that is a part of our discovery of what's showing up and how those principles are working in my life to create it the way that it is in this present moment. And is there something more, as Reverend Sandy talked about today? I'm not done yet. We don't ever want to be done yet, right? Life is infinite. And I heard someone recently say, well, I'm getting old now. And I thought, oh, well, that is absolutely going to be a talk for us. So it's next week, and it relates to this, because life is infinite and eternal. So how do you get old? Well, we'll talk about that next week. Ernest Holmes, our founder, says, our time should be devoted to knowing the truth that sets humanity free from the problem of ignorance. So you've heard me say a lot how much I like that word ignorant. And so I'll just remind you, I was called an ignoramus quite regularly when I was a child. And so I had no affection for that word at all whatsoever, because it was meant in a negative way. But when Ernest Holmes talks about ignorance and our ignorance, he's simply talking about the principles that we have not yet stepped into and understood. And once we do, voila, life is absolutely wonderful. He goes on to say that truth, which alone can bring enlightenment to the world, that war should cease, that people should live together in harmony because they have recognized the divinity within each other. So we talk a lot about how you can only do yourself, and in so doing, you will then show up that way in relationship with others, whether it's personal relationships, or family, or work, or even just in the grocery store, driving down the road. I heard recently that road rage is at an all-time high. So I started planting seeds in my little students, and I told them that whenever anybody gets angry at me and beeps their horn or whatever, I go, sorry. Give them a little wave, give them a little smile, and say you're sorry. It doesn't matter if you even did anything. It sends a message of love and peace out into the world. And we are responsible for ourselves. So, Thich Nhat Hanh, and I don't know if he really said this, but I do know he deals with a lot of helping people overcome anxiety. And what David was talking about, living in the now moment, he talks about that a lot. He says anxiety, the illness of our time, comes primarily from our inability to dwell in the present moment.
Well, adds a different perspective to the now moment, and knowing that life is an ongoing process. And so we're already moving, even though we're in the now moment, we're constantly moving in a forward direction. And so why would we need to go backwards? We're already moving. And so that really adds another perspective to it, doesn't it? So life is an ongoing process. Life is constantly moving forward and growing. We're constantly evolving, one step at a time. Dwelling on the past is stagnating. It's stopping that forward motion. Anchoring us in the past inhibits the free flow of life, our natural flow. I read this recently. You can either look back at one day and say, that's where it got too hard so I stopped, or that's where it got so hard I kept going and did it anyway. Where are you on that path? Are you looking back to where you stopped, or are you still moving forward? Where we make the shift in consciousness is in the present moment. And in the present moment, we are still moving. If we are alive, we are still evolving, we are still growing, we are still expanding. Because if you're not really living. Clara Deaton says, you can spend minutes, hours, days, weeks, or even months over-analyzing, trying to put pieces together, justifying what could have, would have, or should have happened, or you could just leave the pieces on the floor and move on. That's living in the moment, isn't it? Living in the now. Tony Robbins says, stop being afraid what could go wrong and start being excited about what could go right.
Love it. There's a song that we sing sometimes that says, I am the thinker who thinks the thoughts, that changes the things that shape my life. I am the thinker. I have the power to change my life. And it's coming to the point where we actually believe that and understand why we have the power to change our own life. Realizing that we are the thinker of each and every thought. So we can bring that shoulda, coulda, and woulda into the now moment and still have it be a negative if we choose to do that. But do we? Is that really what we want to attract? Ernest Holmes says, we think of metaphysics perhaps as something that only the most profound thinkers have known about. But we should remember, we also are thinkers. Should remember, I am a thinking being, and I have the power to change my life. I remember once a very sweet lady said to me, and she was saging, and she said, you know, dear, you ought not to say that we should do this and we should do that, because you should never tell anyone else what they should do. And I just smiled and said, oh, that's interesting. Why do you say that? And blah, 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 blah. And of course, we are the thinker. So I thought about what she said for a while to see if it fit for me. And it didn't fit for me. Now maybe it does for you, so don't say should anymore. But watch how often you do say it if you decide not to say it, because it's pretty surprising. I do say it a lot, because I give myself that bar that's always just above my head, and I give it for everyone else too, because if the bar's set low, we're going to go low. If the bar is set just above our head, we will rise to it. And I move the bar up for myself and rise to it again, because that is what life is all about. That is what the evolution of life is all about. And Holmes goes on to say, we are all thinking, willing, knowing, conscious centers of life. Can you accept that? Can you claim that? Do you know that you are a thinking, willing, knowing, conscious center of life? Are you willing right now to inside yourself say, I am a thinking, willing, knowing, conscious center of life? Powerful words. And then when something comes up from the past or something in the present, and we realize I coulda, woulda, shoulda, and we're not quite sure, oh, but I am totally sure, because I'm a thinking, willing, knowing, conscious center of life. Out of necessity, I must know. And so we are, in that moment, revealing a healing. And healing means damage doesn't control your life anymore. It does not mean that it never existed. It doesn't mean that what you say happened didn't happen. It simply means that you no longer identify with that. You no longer choose to be that damaged victim. You choose to be empowered. Holmes goes on to say, we are surrounded by, immersed in, and there is flowing through us a creative something. Call it what you will. There is no word that you can speak that is not God. Now, it may be in the negative connotation, because I know we can think of some of those words, absolutely. But it will fall away. It has to fall away. Because the only things that can remain are the things that are of God. Because God is all that is. Every possibility is there for us. We can show up angry, or we can show up kind. We can show up depressed, or we can show up affirming the positive in our life. So, the idea of that should can also be a positive. I should be honest. I should be kind. I should be spiritual. Those are shoulds that I'm claiming for myself. So our power to speak out and accept what we should be doing, and not saying, I woulda, but. No buts in the classroom. No buts. The word we need to stop using is but.
Yeah, get your big butt out of the way. Not you. When I was looking at this topic of coulda, shoulda, woulda, and I was thinking about things that happened in the past and the things that we separate ourselves with that big butt, were things like regrets. And so I started, well, that would be an interesting topic to look up, and so I looked up regrets, and since we started ministry, I've been keeping a list of quotes, and every week I come across a kind of unique quote that I like, and I put it down on those quotes for future reference, and sometimes I'll go through looking up things and see what I can find that would be relevant for our talk, and I have 130 pages of quotes. So I started at the top and I typed in regret. Not one regret in the entire list of quotes. Led me to think, well, I guess regret isn't a very strong science of mind concept, is it? So I thought, well, what does Ernest Holmes say about it? So I have a list of 507 pages of Ernest Holmes quotes. The word regret came up twice. And all those, not a single one in Science of Mind textbook, by the way, does he mention the word regret. But here's the one where he does say, yesterday is forever past. We cannot relive it. No matter how we may regret what happened yesterday, it is impossible actually to live it over again. But often, in imagination, we do live it over again and again. And in so doing, bring all the misery of yesterday into today. Learn to forget yesterday. After we have gone over it and learned by our mistakes, the thing to do is to correct those mistakes and forgive ourselves for anything we have done. Release the past. Let it go. Now those are Science of Mind principles. Release, looking forward, learning from what has happened, and moving forward.
And he may not talk about regret, but he does talk about positive persistence. Positive persistence, creating within our own mind those thoughts that we desire to have, because they are the thoughts that we want to create for us and around us and within us. He says, and I'm going to talk a little bit in this part also about, so that positive persistence is about us personally. But in this piece, he talks about us as a center, as a spiritual entity. And I think that that's valuable too, because I don't know about you, but I'm trying to get this. I am living this science of mind out into the world so that it just dominoes out there into the world, because it is about loving kindness. And when we're focused on loving kindness, as that song says we sang last week, you can't hate your neighbor. They maybe did whatever you said they did, but you can't hate them for it. And if you do, then who's the one hating? We are. So getting this teaching out into the world transforms lives, communities, and I believe the world. This is what he says. And this is from commentaries back in 1933, 90 years ago. This teaching is infinite. He says, there is a lack of spiritual leadership in the world right now, so we shouldn't be concerned what the world thinks of us. We have a religious concept that will revolutionize the world, and we need to stick with it. Another word some people don't like, need. But I do. I need to stick with this teaching. It feeds my soul. It energizes me. It empowers me. It helps me in those moments where something in the physical realm of the universe shows its ugly head, and I get to look at it and go, okay, how am I going to deal with this? Not the way I used to. No way. Not in fear, not in lack, not in limitation, but I'm going to deal with it in love. So what does love look like in this scenario? He goes on to say, persistence will bring success, but it is positive persistence that keeps affirming spiritual reality in spite of material effect. So I'm perceiving positive persistence in this way. We all know, each of us individually, what we think about. And sometimes we can catch a thought that will say, did I just think that? I don't even feel that way. I don't even believe that way. Why would I think such a thing? And that's an attagirl or an attaboy moment. That's a give yourself a pat on the back moment because you caught it and now you can change it. 50% is digging up those hidden belief systems within us, and the other 50% is doing something about them. And so that positive persistence is finding those times when I think to myself, oh, I just got this bill in the mail. Oh my gosh, where's the money going to come from? I don't have that kind of money. And going, whoops, did I just claim that? Or whatever it is. You go at the doctor and you get a health diagnosis you don't like and you go, oh my gosh, I have. Oh, did I just say that? Did I just think that? An opportunity to change our mind into a positive persistence of thought. I am healthy, whole, complete, and perfect. No diagnosis can get in my way of being healthy, whole, complete, and perfect. I am abundant and prosperous. Nothing can get in the way of that. No bill. And if you think back to the past, how many times did you get a bill where you went, oh gee, how am I going to pay for this? Well, I guess it got paid for. You're still here. So it's getting into that state of positive persistence of thought.
I love that. Positive, persistent, constructive energy of thought. In Science of Mind, we have a great spiritual practice. I believe it's our fundamental spiritual practice, affirmative prayer, spiritual mind treatment. And I like the word treatment because we're actually doing a treatment on ourselves. If you have a physical ailment, you treat it physically, but if you have a mental issue, a challenge, you treat it mentally. And so spiritual mind treatment is conditioning the mind to accept positive possibilities, to accept only the positive, constructive, persistently ongoing, upward leading, expanding ideas of life. You don't have to cry over spilled milk. We have to look over our shoulder. Don't look backwards because you're not going that way. You're going forward. Hindsight analysis is valuable if it gives impetus for change and gives opportunities for growth and expansion, sustaining positive evolution. We are constantly evolving. We're taking one step at a time, but one step is built upon the step where we already are. We're evolving into the next, into the next, into the next. We don't want to be declining down the steps.
And so that idea is bringing about a plan. For me, and maybe not for you, maybe you're at a place where you want to just live in the spontaneity of life. For me, I like to have plans, so I should have a plan. And I was just talking a moment ago about the negative aspects of life and bringing them into the positive, persistent thoughts. And so it's getting clear with what it is that triggers those mental states. What is it that triggers the mental state? So if it is, let's just use the bill scenario that I just gave. If it is receiving a bill, you know it's a bill probably when you get your mail. And so when you get your mail and you see it's a bill, immediately maybe that's a trigger. So on your way to the mailbox, have a plan. When I get a bill, I'm going to say, oh, thank you for the abundance that's flowing through me and out into the universe to pay all these bills I have. Or whatever works for you, but have a plan. You know if you're going to your family's house, the one person that gets on your nerves and you hope you don't have to sit beside them or talk with them, maybe, and maybe hopefully you do not have anyone like that in your life. But if you do, have a plan. Have a loving kindness plan. It can be as simple as, oh yeah, oh that's interesting. Smile and nod. I learned that one in my 20s. Smile and nod. You don't have to have a response back. You just have to be loving and kind and feel that within you. The other person isn't your responsibility. You can't fix them, regardless of how much you may even love them. You can't fix them, but you can have a plan.
Yeah, speaking of fixing people, I read something recently about the prison system and talking about rehabilitation and how they can make it work better, because there's some question whether or not the prison system is actually rehabilitating very well. And so they ask questions of prisoners. They do surveys and ask them, you know, having been through this prison system, and specifically reoffenders I'm talking about reoffenders and what brought them back. And they said quite often they would ask the people, being through this whole prison system and going through the rigmarole of it and they having to deal with all this, would you, if set with the same conditions that you had when you were arrested in the first place, do you think you would make the same decisions again? And invariably they found that people saying that, well, if I were in the same condition, under the same circumstances, in the same position in life, feeling that my life was limited and I had no other choices, I probably would make the exact same decision, and I would probably be ending up in here again. So what they found was, in terms to actually rehabilitate, they had to change the habits of the people in the situation. They found that they had to create an intentional shift of consciousness within those prisoners, so that if they ever came across the same situation again, they know there were other possibilities, there were other choices, there were greater intention in life rather than ending back in the same place you were before. If you always do what you've always done, you always get what you always got. And so they started to shift the way they created new habits, rehabilitating the prisoners, hoping that that would make a difference.
That's a great idea. So in summation today, we took a lot of different ideas, and I created a list mostly from the words of Ernest Holmes as we've spoken today, and I call it the should-dos list. And you don't have to remember them because I'm going to give you a copy of them along with this great notepad. You don't get the whole pad, but you get one piece, and if there are extras, you can have more than one piece. And it says coulda, shoulda, woulda. So you can put it up around your house somewhere where you will most likely see it, so that you can think about when you're going to the coulda, shoulda, woulda in a negative way, and when you are applying your personal list or my personal list of should-dos. 1, pray. 2, remember, I am a thinker. 3, use constructive conversation. 4, surrender the mind to success. 5, affirm your spiritual reality with positive persistence. And 6, be devoted to knowing truth. And so it is.
So it is.